Hello. Hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Educational Media and Technology section of the Medical Library Association's, I believe, third webinar. This one is going to be on the ACRL Framework for Information Literacy, and we're really happy to have all 61 and growing people here participating today. My name is Molly Knapp, and I'm the past chair of EMTS. And I'm happy to welcome Craig Gibson here. He was one of the co-conveners of the task force of the ACRL framework revisions, and he's going to talk today about implications for health sciences libraries. So first, let me give you a little bit of background on Craig. He is a professor and head of the Food, Agriculture, and Environmental Science Library at The Ohio State University. He's also been Associate Director for Research and Education at Ohio State, with responsibilities for reference and research services, assessment, outreach, engagement, the library's instruction program, and departmental libraries. Previously, he was Associate University Librarian for Research, Instruction, and Outreach at George Mason University. He was also Head of Library User Education at Washington State University and Reference Instruction Librarian at Lewis and Clark State College. His current research interests focus on threshold concepts for information literacy, research and learning commons and the relation to student success, and models for collaboration between academic libraries and teaching and learning centers. Since 2000, he's taught in the ACRL Immersion Program, which is a great program if you're interested in education, not just for general academic libraries, but also for health sciences libraries. So he's been involved with that since 2000. He was also editor of the ACRL Publications and Librarianship Series from 2001 to 2013. And like I said before, he was co-chair of the ACRL Information Literacy Standards Revision Task Force, a group that, as we all know, released the Framework for Information Literacy for Higher Education just recently this year in 2015. And finally, Mr. Gibson was recipient of the Miriam Dudley Instruction Librarian Award in 2008 and the ACRL President's Special Recognition Award for Immersion Faculty in 2009. So we're really happy to have him here today. I'm now going to pass the mic to Ryan Harris, our CE coordinator, and he's going to give a little bit of information about getting continuing education credit for this webinar if you are an EMTS member. Ryan?
Hey everybody, this is Ryan, and we have been working this year, EMTS, some of the leadership of trying to provide CE for EMTS members for some of these webinars. So this is our first attempt of doing so. I'm going to be getting a list of all the attendees from Margaret after the meeting, and I'm going to cross-reference that with the EMTS membership list, which I can do very easily now on the updated MLA website. And then I'll be sending anyone who is an EMTS member who is attending this webinar a CE evaluation and a CE form saying you got some CE for this. So this is an experiment, and we're going to see how it works. And thank you very much for filling out the CE evaluation once you're done, and I send you the CE credit. And that's all I have. So I guess we'll get started with Craig now.
Hello, everyone. I'm really glad to have a chance to talk with you today about the Framework for Information Literacy for Higher Education. I've talked with a number of other groups in the last several months since the ACRL board accepted the framework. And of course, there's been lots of discussion. There continues to be lots of discussion of the implications of the framework. And I thought what I would do initially is go through some of the theoretical pieces or the foundations, the reasoning behind the creation of the framework, and then begin to explore a little bit about the implications for medical education as well. And of course, I know there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end, and I'll do my best to field those. So I always start off when thinking about the framework in and considering the students' experience of research, students at all levels, and of course, students who move into professional programs or once undergraduates. So we have to think about where your students and medical programs are coming from, and what their experience has been, or maybe what it continues to be. I've often asked groups to think about students' research skills succinctly. If they were to describe it, how would they describe those research skills? And I've gotten responses like, well, truncated views of what the possibilities are for research, or perhaps they're overconfident, they lack context, they don't understand the landscape, they're very, very narrow or goal-oriented. I've heard all of these responses before from librarians who work with students. And in thinking about the framework, the task force really considered some of the research findings that we have had in front of us for a number of years. For example, from Project Information Literacy, some of which many of you may be familiar with. Some of the findings from this research talk about how students are overwhelmed about starting points. They don't understand the nature and scope of academic research assignments themselves. They get confused about the research process, when to start and stop, how to conclude if they don't have precise instructions. Of course, they go to certain resources. They go to Google, they go to Wikipedia, or they learn a few databases and they go back to them repeatedly. When they come into higher ed or higher ed institutions from high school, they have learned to do research perhaps in a fairly narrow or conventional way, the standard research paper way, and they are not familiar with academic discourse, and they don't know how to begin to change some of those high school habits into higher ed expectations, or real academic research expectations at a higher level. Other findings from other sources, they start with Google. For many students, discovery is not a problem. They are finding something, but evaluation and context, contextual understanding are the real challenges. And again, they're often overconfident because they are finding something and they're not understanding the context or the discourse or the conversation within which pieces of research can be placed. They confuse library-sponsored resources with what they find in the open web. Not surprisingly, they're often satisficing with what they find is good enough, and they often ask for help from friends or other people rather than from librarians. So this, again, is a summary from various research studies that was summarized in a recent article in American Libraries. So to go back to Project Information Literacy, context is the single most important missing element for our students, whatever the level. Not understanding the big picture, knowing how to find and secure relevant resources, the whole information gathering process, not having the vocabulary, not knowing the language, and not knowing the expectations of assignments themselves. So with that as background, I want to talk now about the framework and how the task force started thinking about creating it as a successor to the standards. Many of you may be familiar with the ACRL standards, and which have been around for about 15 years now. They were first published in 2000, and they marked a really major advance for us. But over time, I think many of us began to see that this was a very prescriptive checklist approach. And I've kind of represented this on the left side of the screen in a very high level way. That is, students are expected to determine the extent of the information need, to concentrate on access and search, to evaluate, to use and apply, and to consider the ethical and legal and social issues in this fairly linear checklist way. And of course, if you look at the document itself for the ACRL standards, you would see how detailed some of those are, with performance indicators or specific learning outcomes specified. With the framework, we are considering a more holistic model where scholarship and scholarly conversation, authority, information creation, the overall searching process, the process of inquiry or framing research questions all intersect. This is kind of like a network or a web of understanding. So it's really a more holistic model that touches all aspects of research and scholarship. So we wanted to think about students beginning to understand information and research as part of an ecosystem to help them understand why they are doing what they are doing, why they're making the choices they're making, rather than just narrow procedural steps or skills. Getting beyond skills and resources and really focusing on how knowledge creation, searching works from a human perspective. So all of these journals that we expect them to use, or articles or books on the shelves, there are actually human beings behind the creation of all of these, and students need to understand all of those human processes of knowledge creation and searching as part of an ecosystem. Whenever I'm thinking about an ecosystem, I've sort of began to represent it in this way. Students have some knowledge of all of these parts when we use terminology with them, and we talk about copyright. We talk about social media, and they certainly use it. We use the term social open access, databases, media organizations. All of these things don't really connect up very well for them, and the framework is intended in large part to help them understand how all of these fit together in an ecosystem so that they can begin to make more informed choices about their research. So the framework is meant to show connections among them and to help them begin to form those connections for themselves with appropriate assignments that they might be working on, or assignments that faculty would design in a more intentional way to help them create these larger understandings. So the goals for the framework were to create this flexible system of concepts, and also to shows the student as a creator rather than just a consumer. And this is the idea of meta-literacy that we drew on as well in creating the framework, that students are already doing some kinds of work that's really participatory and in collaborative environments, particularly in social media environments. They're already learning, and how do we capitalize on what they already know and move that into more scholarly kinds of work that they might be able to do based on their previous experience. We wanted to introduce the idea in the framework of their monitoring their own thinking, or thinking about their own thinking, so that they could self-correct and improve over time, self-regulate, and also to recognize that learning is also dispositional. That is, it's a matter of habits of mind, or the affective as well as the cognitive factors that are really important part of learning. So we were drawing on all of these considerations and thinking about how to create the framework itself. So let's talk now about the major elements of the framework. We decided that there would be 6 frames, and we were drawing on some earlier research, a Delphi study that identified what are called threshold concepts, and I'll talk about those in just a minute. And what the task force did also was to create what we called knowledge practices, which are demonstrations that the students understand these core concepts, and then dispositions, which are more of the habits of mind or the affective aspects of learning as well. So the structure of the framework looks like this. There are threshold concepts, or we can call these conceptual understandings, which are undergirded by knowledge practices and dispositions, which I've just described. And these three parts go into what we call a frame, and there are 6 of these. And if you looked at the framework, you're familiar with what they are. One of them is called scholarship as a conversation. Another one is called authority as constructed and contextual. So the threshold concepts are the underpinning ideas, and then they're supported by dispositions and knowledge practices. These all fit together in creating a frame. So I want to talk just briefly about threshold concepts. We decided early on to use threshold concepts as the underpinning frame of the framework. These came from research in the United Kingdom, a different kind of learning theory, thinking about learning, and they were adapted in this country by librarians who have conducted the Delphi study: Townsend, Hofer, Brunetti, and Liu. And Lori Townsend, who I've been mentioned here, was actually a member of our task force. Uh, Threshold concepts themselves can be thought of as kind of portals or gateway concepts. They're like a rite of passage. Once the student goes through the portal, they begin to understand a discipline or an area of study in a deeper way. So threshold concepts really involve conceptual understanding and crossing a threshold. They have to get through this challenging space. It's often a concept that is challenging or difficult, and it may cause them to become stuck, and they have to get past that stage of being stuck in order to understand the larger landscape and the discipline. So this is called the liminal state. The student often is a novice, a beginner in a discipline. They're an apprentice, and there's a lot of confusion, uncertainty, anxiety initially whenever they first start studying a discipline or an area of study. There are difficult ideas they have to encounter, counterintuitive ideas, new vocabulary or unfamiliar ways of thinking. Once they get past this stage, then they begin to achieve kind of integration of understanding how concepts in that field relate to each other. They have a shift in perspective, so there's a transformation in how they're actually learning, greater facility in their learning. So their characteristics, drawing on the earlier research that I mentioned of threshold concepts, I'll just mention a few of these earlier. They're meant to be transformative. They help the students integrate smaller pieces of knowledge. Once the student gets something, they don't go back to an earlier level of understanding. They may demarcate or set off this particular area of study or discipline from other areas, that is, they're bounded. And again, they're often troublesome, particularly at first. So just a few examples. Some of you may be familiar with, you can think of many of these in disciplines that you might have studied earlier. Geology, I would say that the scale of geologic time is a threshold concept in that field. Most economists would say students have to learn what opportunity cost is in that field before they can begin to understand the discipline in a deeper way. Students in history have to understand that there's no one account of the past that explains an event, that there are many perspectives. Biology, it might be photosynthesis. In fact, these threshold concepts have been cited in research in the threshold concepts literature about challenging concepts in those fields by faculty in these fields. So far, our field of information literacy, the Delphi study that we drew on, identified these. The task force adapted the Delphi parts of the Delphi study. We did not follow it exactly. However, these are the 6 that the task force identified. Authority is constructed and contextual, information creation as a process, information has value, research is inquiry, scholarship is a conversation, and searching as strategic exploration. So you can think of these as big unifying ideas that bring together parts of the information ecosystem that students have to move around in with greater facility in order to become information literate over time. So I think one of the things the task force talked about is how these all touch on each other, that research is inquiry, that is being able to develop a research question and refine it, improve it, really depends on the ability to know how authority works, and how authority can be very contextual and different depending on the situation, and how scholarship and research pieces of research influence each other, or individual scholars influence each other over time. So all of these actually intersect, they're not separate. So I'm not going to read this. And those of you who've looked at the framework before have looked at that document. And what I'm giving you here is the text for the one that we call authority as constructed and contextual. And really the key here is that judging authority and evaluating sources, it can be very, very nuanced and very, very contextual depending on what kind of authority is needed for a particular assignment or requirement or project, and the context in which it will actually be used, and also where it's actually coming from. So the student needs to begin to consider evaluating a source in a deeper way, rather than just saying, well, this is a peer-reviewed source, or this citation actually looks like it's a peer-reviewed source. They have to consider authority in a deeper way. So for each of these threshold concepts, we identified knowledge practices, and again, I'm giving some examples of those, and the ability to understand how authority is constructed and contextual could be demonstrated by research tools and indicators of authority to determine the credibility of sources, and understanding other elements that might temper the credibility, or understanding how disciplines already have acknowledged authorities, but that there might be some disagreement even among scholars in a field about who the standard or the best known scholars are, or researchers. And also with this particular threshold concept, we identified some dispositions. And so these are more the affective or the motivational aspect that we wrote for each one, and the need for the student to be motivated to think in a certain way and to improve their learning in a certain way, to have open-mindedness, for example, when they are looking at conflicting perspectives and information sources. So some of you may be familiar with another model that is often used actually in K through 12, but also in higher ed. A book called Understanding by Design by Wiggins and McTeague. And we also considered this model because we think it aligns fairly well with our approach. That is using a backward design model, thinking about what the enduring understandings are. That is, what is most important for students to know in any field, and that central, that innermost circle, and then out around from that, what's important to know and do, and then just what is worth being familiar with. So it's, in terms of instructional design, it's important to think about what the enduring understandings are, determining the results that you want them to get to, how are they going to demonstrate that, and only step number 3, planning the instruction that you'll be given based on those other steps. So, potential of the framework, we're still exploring that and learning. There are a lot of people out there who are experimenting with the framework. I have some suggestions and thought about curriculum and developing curriculum for information literacy using the framework. I think that actually it's 3 points of a triangle. Librarians need obviously to be aware of the framework, how it's put together, and how to have conversations with faculty. But I also think from a pedagogical research perspective that it would be really important to actually talk to students. Maybe an obvious point about what they don't understand, what their roadblocks are, where their gaps in understanding are. After all, that's the whole idea behind threshold concepts that we base the framework on, is that we need to help them get across the threshold, the gaps in understanding, in order to understand the wider landscape of information and research. Glenys Cousin, who actually is a researcher who's written a lot about threshold concepts in the UK, coined a term called transactional curriculum inquiry. And she suggested that faculty in any discipline, and this would go for librarians who teach or design courses, look for areas of overloaded content. Where is there too much? What are the core ideas? Look for the bottlenecks to understanding, and talk to students, identify key areas that they need to master or that are causing misunderstandings for them. Barbara Pfister, who's many of you may follow on her blog, actually suggested, here's another curriculum design consideration, that we want students to stay for a while in that liminal state, rather than pushing them through and having them learn artificially or superficially. In other words, learning involves some confusion, and it is important that the students' learning actually be genuine. They have to work through the struggles with learning a difficult concept. Also, I would just work with your colleagues, work with faculty to design assignments, and begin to think about how these frames, that is, scholarship as a conversation, or authorities constructed and contextual, could be positioned or taken apart and positioned strategically across major parts of a curriculum, and begin to align the threshold concepts with the learning outcomes that you might already have, or rewrite the ones that you already have. Design learning activities or lessons around them. Again, allow for some confusion and uncertainty. Keep coming back to the threshold concept more than once. Now, I would like to also introduce an idea here that I think has some significance for medical education. I've been reading in recent months about the idea of signature pedagogies in different disciplines. It's a term that Lee Shulman coined a number of years ago. And by this, he really means the types of the teaching that organize ways in which practitioners in a field are educated or trained for their future professions. So it's sort of the disciplinary styles. It's the disciplinary ways of thinking and organizing instruction to initiate somebody who's new into a professional setting and help them learn to be more expert. So here are a few examples, and I'm sure these will be familiar to you, particularly in medical education, clinical rounds. This is how this is a vital part of their learning. And law school, the case method with Socratic questioning is a signature pedagogy. In business school, case studies, and engineering, design studios, and teacher education, obviously practice teaching with observations by the expert teacher. This is an example of a particular of signature pedagogies in professional education for these areas. There's been a lot of discussion as well about signature pedagogies and other academic disciplines that are more like traditional ones we think of as pre-professional or regular academic fields like sociology or history. And I'm just giving you a few examples here that seem most relevant. So whenever I think about the framework and how it might support students in medical education, say, or doing clinical rounds, I think you can look at the framework and begin to see how you can adapt it. And thinking about, well, students who are doing clinical rounds have to be really expert and efficient in their use of time, and efficient searching for directly relevant resources that will help them. Understanding the larger medical literature landscape itself as background would be really important. Understanding authorities for treatment plans that would be really relevant in the clinical setting. Being able to reflect on what they're finding, and that is being metacognitive and what they're finding in the literature and making strategic choices very carefully and doing this under the guidance of somebody who's more expert while they're doing the clinical rounds. So this would be an example of how I would think of the framework's flexibility and adaptability in a specific professional setting that is part of professional education. So to back up from that a little bit, I think we could think about the framework also just in terms of curricular positioning in the undergraduate curriculum. If we were to work with, say, the frame scholarship as a conversation, there could be a way of integrating that, and institutions are doing that, say in freshman inquiry courses, where students are given particular kinds of assignment that help them understand how scholars influence each other. That could be built on in research methods or writing intensive courses. And then depending on the structure of a particular institution, in synthesis or capstone courses as well. And I've even thought that for many institutions that co-curriculum positioning, the framework could actually work in field experience settings with particular frames, with what we are calling service learning out there, where students are doing community related projects, or even with internships in an international setting. And I'm just giving some examples here. There are many ways, there are myriad ways that the framework can be adapted in the co-curriculum as well. I think for professional programs that some really important things for librarians to think about in connection with the framework and working with faculty and our administrators would be to think about the signature pedagogies of the field and have the interviews with faculty and students and begin to align framework elements with the teaching and learning styles that are very particular to that particular field, and to think about the structure of the curriculum itself, obviously, and to be available or to be on curriculum committees and to work, say, with residency or field experience coordinators, and then obviously to be able to think about the accreditation standards for that particular field and to look at the language used in it to find opportunities for informational literacy in it and to begin to work with people who are working on accreditation standards and advocate for revisions where appropriate to include the framework elements as well. So there have been lots of questions about assessment in relation to the framework. There was a key article published by Megan Oakleaf last year, and I've given the title of it and the URL for it. I would encourage you to read that article if you want to see a way of using the framework with particular learning outcomes. She's got some good examples of how to do that, and she's following Wiggins and McTighe again, which outcomes drive the design of pedagogy and assessment. And she cites Meyer and Land, and some of the assessment methods that might actually be more useful in the future might be using portfolios or blogs or research diaries or concepts maps. In other words, to assess formatively rather than summatively how students are learning or what their gaps in understanding really are. So I would just wrap this up here by saying there is work going forward. I would encourage all of you to have conversations in your local settings with faculty and with students. Find ways of shaping the framework, adapting it locally. See if you can find some allies in your administration who are already thinking in this way. If you have a teaching and learning center at your institution or a unit that really deals with improving teaching in any way, getting support from them, and developing a community of practice or a learning community, or whatever term you want to use at your institution that would help you use the framework or experiment with it. ACRL has ongoing plans. Sharon Mader is the visiting program officer who's currently working with the framework. She's working with a group to plan continuing education, and there is a website and a WordPress site actually with some of the opportunities there. She's thinking about multi-pronged educational approaches. Also a website with the framework example of the week. These are very much in progress. And there's also been some discussion about creating an online repository or a sandbox where librarians out in the field can deposit examples of syllabi or assignments that actually use the framework. So that is a little bit more in the future. So I'm going to stop now, and this has been a very general overview. I wanted to give you the background about where the framework came from, the theoretical underpinnings, and to give you some ideas about how it could begin to be used in medical education, or what you might do there in your local setting. So I think maybe one of our moderators might be able to help with some questions now.
Yes, thank you so much, Craig. That was really, that was a great overview. So if anyone has any questions, I'm going to direct your attention to the bottom of the Zoom window where there's a Q&A. Oh, looks like we got a question. So the first question is, may we access the PowerPoint of this presentation? Craig,
yes.
I do, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
Yes. Okay, so we will have a recording of this webinar available on the EMTS blog in a couple of weeks or so. So, okay, here's a question from Molly Montgomery. I have a really tough time getting my head around the high-level theoretical concepts of the framework and how to apply those to day-to-day teaching. So, Craig, do you have any?
I think if you look at your day-to-day teaching, and if you documented that in any way, or if you have lesson plans or if you simply have some documentation or if you're doing some assessment in the moment, more classroom-based assessment, that might reveal to you where students are getting stuck or they're having problems, and that just starting from where you are, I think that in itself might be revealing. I don't know what you do, if you do minute papers at the end of your sessions, or if you've actually looked at with colleagues. I don't know what your setting is, if you're working solo or if you're working with colleagues, but having a conversation about charting out among all the courses that you teach, where the students, what is the architecture here that you can create, or the larger arc of understanding relating to any of these. For example, if you were to take scholarship as a conversation, how could you teach that, begin to teach that in a smaller way, even with one assignment in one class, talk to the faculty member. I think it's just a matter of looking for some openings and building on what you're already doing, and talking to colleagues and seeing how you could create some other assignments that also work with the idea of scholarship as a conversation, or any of the other 5 frames. I know it seems very, very ambitious to do this, but I think if we really want to push students a little bit more, I think we need to look at what we're doing and find those openings to enlarge their understanding a little bit. And classroom-based assessment might be one way of doing that.
Great. So Molly says, thank you, that's helpful. And everybody can follow along, I assume, on this Q&A panel. So here's another question from Susan. How could we hear about the sandbox? Oh, sorry. hearing about the Sandbox repository.
Yes, I'm going to ask, some of you may be on the listserv. There's an actual ACRL set up a listserv called the ACRL Frame listserv, and a lot of news gets posted there. Actually, what I can do is get in touch with Sharon Mader, who's the program officer at ACRL right now for information literacy, and get an update from her about the sandbox or the repository. The last time I talked to her, I think it's still out there in the future, and I think what she is talking about in the interim is this website of the week dealing with the framework as a first step. So, but I can get in touch with her and follow up, and let's see if I could help supply some information that way. It's just that's an idea that the task force suggested, and there's a lot of other work that's going on in the meantime to build up to that.
Thanks. So it sounds like the Sandbox, that kind of repository, is still in the theoretical.
It's not happening yet. There's some other work that needs to happen first.
Okay. Cool. Let's see, more questions. Here's a question from Chris Alpe. Is anyone investigating this more in the health sciences?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And I know I am not aware of, there was an article published on while the framework was being developed by Maureen Knapp
Yeah.
and a co-author. I don't have the citation with me right now, but it's something that we could post, and I think that was a really good exploratory article and thinking about the implications in the health sciences.
Yeah, that was I co-authored that paper with Stuart Brower, who's at Oklahoma. He's in Oklahoma, and it was in Medical Reference Services Quarterly, and that was kind of at the request of that journal to just kind of envision where the new framework would go in terms of health sciences. But it definitely was written before the finalized versions came out. And
but you had some really good initial thoughts about how it might work. I think what needs to happen now is how does this work within the particular curricular structures of medical education?
Yeah, and it's another thing that I wonder about. Somebody, I think Chris Alpe also said she's interested in how it applies to evidence-based practice, and I'm also curious to how this works with undergraduate nursing and allied health programs, which are more,
Yes.
they have that.
Yes, evidence-based. Yes.
Yeah, because like those health sciences programs have that signature pedagogy that you mentioned.
Yes.
But they're also like undergraduate. They're not necessarily medicine, which is kind of its own animal sometimes.
Right. No, I think all of these areas are ripe for curricular experimentation, building on what is already in the field or the discipline, evidence-based practice, critical reasoning, case-based reasoning, whatever the field is, linking information literacy with that. So it's not just seen as a library educational agenda. That's the way that it really needs to get integrated into the curriculum, is to look at what the overarching or what the underpinnings of the curriculum are and what the signature pedagogies are.
So I have a question for you, Craig, while we're waiting to see if anybody else has some in the box. What are some steps to take in terms of reaching out to faculty? Do you have any success stories so far with approaching faculty with this new structure?
I think what we've been able to do here is work with our Teaching and Learning Center and promote the framework through them. And we've offered some workshops under their umbrella. That's one thing that we've done here. We're having conversations about the framework within the libraries. It's a large organization, so we have, I've talked to various groups within the library. I think the liaison program, if you have what you call a liaison program, are subject librarians who have an integrated set of responsibilities for a particular academic program. They could become the experts on the framework and work with curriculum committees, particularly whenever there are opportunities for reaccreditation or academic program review. I think any of those are good opportunities for a librarian, a subject librarian or liaison librarian, to position himself or herself in the context of looking at a whole set of courses together and say, okay, well, gee, I could look at all of these courses and begin to do some curriculum mapping and see how these big ideas, these threshold concepts, and the support, the framework itself, the pieces of the framework could begin to be integrated into various parts of the curriculum in a more strategic way. Thinking strategically, I think, is really important. So it really depends on your institution and your setting. You'll have to decide what you can do locally depending on the politics, the opportunities, and the structure, and opportunities that come along your way, particularly reaccreditation or academic program review or curriculum review, or just finding some key allies outside the library. I think it's really, really important to find those key allies wherever they are. Work with people who work with service learning, or people who are working with internships with students out in the field, or residencies. There are all kinds of possibilities.
Great. Yes, Anne-Marie Gruber adds undergraduate capstones are another opportunity to talk about that scholarship of conversation.
Yes. So if there are capstone courses or synthesis courses, I think that's a great idea, because you could introduce parts of these in freshman courses or first year courses and begin to build them up, and so that you're doing more synthesizing and have deeper assignments that at the senior level that really build on what you've been doing more intentionally starting with first year. Other questions?
Okay, well, I have another question.
Okay.
So, and this is more about curriculum mapping, which has come up from time to time, but do you have any good references or places that you could look to get kind of a crash course on that? They're available for free online or anything?
Yeah, there are. If you're, I could probably send you some citations those if you'd like. there are a whole bunch of them, and there's Char Booth has done a lot of work with curriculum mapping. She did this at Claremont Colleges, of course, and there's a particular structure there and that set of undergraduate colleges that drove what they did. And she has written about that and given presentations about the way that they did it. But there are other models for doing it. So I could send you some citations that you could share with others.
Yeah, sounds good. We're all librarians here. We can Google it. But yes, definitely, we'll look up that.
Other questions?
Here's something from Heather Collins. We're in the process of medical curriculum review, have done the foundational work to map the framework with the competencies and create ACGME milestones and entrustable professional activities. We're working to connect with other medical education librarians. Is connecting with Sharon Mader the best way to connect with like-minded persons?
I think Sharon would love to hear from you.
Mhm.
I think she would. Her email is smater@uno.edu. I could also send that, Molly, to you.
Okay, thanks. I sent I answered by text in the conversation window. So if you go in the Q&A and go to answered, you can grab her email address.
Yeah, I'm sure she would love to. See, this sounds like a really great example of how to use the framework with a professional education curriculum.
Yeah, it's exciting, unknown times. So that's really an opportunity for a lot of library educators to get some really valuable research out of this, since it's coming in on the ground floor, you know.
There's a lot of research opportunities, and we really did think in creating the framework that librarians would run with it. I think some really are and are finding ways of doing research on changing their instruction programs and doing research in concert with faculty collaborators, collaborative research using the framework. So really glad to hear about this example. Other questions?
Okay, well, we still have a couple minutes left. Any more questions or comments? How do we get more accreditation bodies? How do we get accreditation bodies more on board?
I think that is a really good question. Are you talking about professional accrediting bodies or regional accrediting bodies? There are some regional accrediting associations that have been much more attuned to information literacy in general in the past. I assume you're talking about professional accrediting bodies, though.
Regional and professional.
Yeah, the Middle States Association has been much more attuned in the past to information literacy. They made some changes and dropped out information literacy, and there was a hue and cry about that from the library community. So they've done some work to reinstate it. WASC on the West Coast, the regional accrediting body out there, has been very attuned. It varies a great deal from region to region. I think that ACRL has some key work here to do with the professional accrediting bodies and outreach to them as well. So I think there's some really good opportunities, something Sharon is aware of as well. I have talked to her about it in the past.
So it sounds like Sharon Mader is kind of like the.
Right now she is. She's doing a lot of work for professional education, but she's aware of all of the work that needs to be done to advance the framework, working with multiple constituents.
Here's a good thing, and again from Anne Marie. I meet with the physician assistant program accreditors tomorrow. Key talking point you'd advocate.
Key talking point that I would advocate would be students will become more expert more rapidly if they are conversant with the information ecosystem and the medical literature in a better way. I'm just talking off the top of my head here, but that's something I think, you know, the idea of efficiency and expertise and becoming more proficient more rapidly, if they have a firm grasp on that, this set of understandings, these big ideas.
Okay. Students will become more expert more rapidly if they are more conversant in the medical literature in a better way.
And the ecosystem that ties together.
The research ecosystem.
The research ecosystem and the medical field.
Cool. And kudos to you, Anne-Marie, for asking about elevator speeches. One thing with medical librarians is kind of been a theme is developing your elevator speech for that day that you get in the elevator with the big kahuna. What are you going to say? So there's a blurb.
Probably still needs a little bit of work, but that's something off the spontaneously off the top of my head.
All right. Well, so we have just a couple minutes left. Do you have any final thoughts? Would you like to plug the ACRL Immersion Program or anything else you know about?
Yeah, I would plug that. We are beginning to incorporate some parts of the framework into the curriculum for the immersion program. And I would also encourage you to sign up for the ACRL Frame listserv and follow some of the conversations. There's been a whole spate of commentary about the framework in recent weeks since the fall semester started. And just stay in touch with what's going on. And there are conferences that are going on, some of the more general library conferences like the LOEX conference, where the framework is a big theme this fall, but there are other events at other academic library conferences where the framework has already made its appearance and will be making its appearance in the future. So I think you'll see more and more articles and presentations, articles written and presentations given on the framework. So just continue to do your due diligence with environmental scanning to stay informed.
Great. And everybody, Susan Bridger just posted the link to the ACRL Frame list in the Q&A panel. So if you want to grab that, I'm on that, and it's fairly high yield, I guess. But put it in an email folder. There is a lot of good stuff. A really good infographics just came through today on the different 6 frameworks. So just like to take this moment once again to thank all of y'all for attending today. Again, if you're an EMTS member, Ryan will be in touch with the survey link so you can get the continuing education credit. Mucho thank you to Craig for meeting with us today, and good luck to everyone in your educational endeavors in Library Land.
And thank all of you for attending today and for the really good questions. Some really good questions and suggestions came up today.
Great. Oh, and one final thank you. I would be remiss if I did not give a shout out to Margaret Hoogland at ATSU, who hosted this webinar for us and was our behind the scenes mistress of the media. So thank you for that too.